Coming up next weekend on September the 16th in Oshawa, plus September the 17th and 18th in Mississauga, Progress Wrestling comes to Canada to collaborate on a weekend extravaganza of shows with Smash Wrestling. With that said, I have the honor and pleasure of being joined by one of the most talked about wrestlers in the world today. He is the extraordinary gentleman, Mr. Jack Gallagher. How's it going, sir?
I am very, very good, sir. How are you?
Not too bad at all. Very much better now, considering I'm being joined on the line by you. I really appreciate the time. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. You're very kind.
Now, Smash versus Progress next weekend, Canada. A big one for you. 3 matches, 3 days. Evil Uno, Mike Rollins, Sebastian Suave. Let's go through these one by one.
Okay. I believe night 1 is Evil Uno, if I'm correct in saying so. We're looking at a masked wrestler there, has a bit more of a lucha libre influence. I've seen him on the American independents for quite some time, so it'll be quite interesting to travel up to Canada to wrestle him. I'm not as familiar with Mike Rollins myself, so I'm actually saving that as a pleasant surprise. And Sebastian Suave, perhaps not a lot of people know, was someone I trained with in 01 in Japan for 3 months.
Very, very interesting. So you have a bit of a background with him.
Yes, I'm very aware of Sebastian. Very, very aware.
Now talk a little about your experiences with him and, take us through the road to this matchup.
Well, obviously, Progress was trying to put together their sort of team to send over and represent Britain as well as they could in one of the colonies. And when it comes to the matchups, it wasn't a choice on our part, but I was very, very happy to see Sebastian on the other side of the bracket from me. You know, it was around 2013, I believe he spent about 3 months in Tokyo with us, training and being on the shows and traveling, and it was actually a very pleasant surprise when I saw his name on the card.
It's awesome. It's going to be 3 great matchups for you in Canada next weekend. An honor and a pleasure for me to get to see all 3 of them and you in action for the very first time. I was actually supposed to be heading out to California last weekend for PWG's Battle of Los Angeles, and I know you were supposed to be a part of that tournament too. So just to get this question out of the way, and if you don't mind answering it, why were you absent from the Battle of Los Angeles tournament in Reseda last weekend?
I was having some travel issues with my passport. I believe a couple of people figured it out, but it was to do with work visas, and I'll just leave it at that.
All right. I just wanted to see if I can get an answer out there, and there it is. So for anybody who was wondering why Jack wasn't a part of last weekend's Battle of Los Angeles tournament, there it is. And hopefully we could see you in a Pro Wrestling Guerrilla ring down the road. I'm sure not in the near future, but I'm sure that's something that's going to come together later down the line.
Well, that'd be very lovely if I had the opportunity.
Now, obviously, a lot of people are aware that you're going to be finishing up on the independent scene coming up very soon. And with that said, Progress is a place where you've been a staple, clearly, with the Progress versus Smash shows we've been talking about. It's going to be yourself teaming up with FSU, Mark Andrews and Eddie Dennis, as well as Damian Moser to take on the Origin. You want to talk a little bit about how this has come together? Because for the past few months, this has been an ongoing story in Progress Wrestling.
Well, the Origin is made up of Liverpool's #1, Zach Gibson, perhaps the mouthiest wrestler in all the British wrestling, Dave Mastiff, El Ligero and Nathan Cruz. And as the Origin, they believe that they've been there since show 1 of Progress and that they, for some reason, are entitled to other things. They've run afoul of both myself, Eddie Dennis, Mark Andrews at the last show, and Damon Mosier previously. So the 4 of us got together and decided, you know what, lads, I think you've been taking some liberties and it's time for you to man up, as it were.
And that's going to be going down at Chapter 36. I believe that's September the 25th, if I'm getting that date correct.
You are correct, sir. You've done your research.
ProgressWrestling.com. Get your tickets. Don't be shunned out. I believe there's only a few left. That's going to be a big one. You guys are going to need a bigger room again.
Yes, we are indeed. Thankfully, we've got one.
Now let's get into the good stuff. the Cruiserweight Classic. How did you get contacted by the WWE? Because at first you were confirmed for the tournament, and then you ended up going into a qualifying match with Pete Dunne. So tell us how all this comes together and how you get in contact with the biggest promotion in wrestling.
Thankfully, I am a very, very, very minor acquaintance of Mr. William Regal. He recommended me to enter the tournament, and I believe originally there was not humming and hawing, but obviously Pete Dunne himself is a very talented wrestler. So a qualifying match was arranged instead, and thankfully I managed to make Pete submit to a flying heel hook, which is one of my specialties.
Right, and then coming together, the Cruiserweight Classic, you were part of the 32 best cruiserweights in the world, representing, various countries, and you had the honor and the privilege to face off against not only Akira Tozawa, but Fabian Eichner, and I know a lot of people haven't heard about Fabian too much, so talk about those two experiences and working with Tozawa and Eichner.
Fabian was an incredibly interesting experience because he had a lot of primary training from a wrestler known as Steve Wright, who also wrestled as Bull Blitzer. So he has an English wrestling background in his training. He's also an Italian who for some reason speaks German, the reason of which was never made clear. Fabian was very, 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 very interesting to wrestle, particularly because he has that hybrid style. He can do a little bit of everything very well. I myself am more of a specialist. I like to do one thing excellently. Now, Akira Tozawa is obviously someone maybe with a bit more name value coming from Dragon Gate. Correct. And touring the American independents, and has been claimed to have perhaps the best German suplex in all of professional wrestling. And you know what? There's a debate to be had there. It was fantastic. It was eye-opening as an experience, both as me as a performer and me as a competitor. And it pushed me. And I do believe I've come out even better from this. And thankfully, I've gained a few fans along the way.
How was it like performing in Full Sail University? Because that's one of those venues that's very unique to professional wrestling. Take us through that experience.
Well, the interesting part about it was I think a lot of us didn't quite not think it was real. I didn't think we all thought we were getting a massive practical joke played on us. But you could see the look in everyone's eyes when we walked into the venue for the first time and looked around and started taking it in and realizing what really we'd gotten ourselves in for. And once the crowd was there, that was amplified. I myself don't typically deal with nerves once I'm in the ring, but that build-up is the worst part. So it was a fun few hours for me, shall we say.
What kind of feedback did you get from WWE officials regarding your matches in the tournament? And obviously that led to what we saw this past Monday on Raw, you being announced for the Cruiserweight division.
I think I surprised a lot of people. I said before, obviously, that William Regal had Mr. Regal, I should say, had an eye out, and he has an eye out on a lot of European wrestling and American wrestling. But I think outside of himself, I'm not sure how much of the WWE staff really knew who I was. And to be frank, I'm very aware that the American fans weren't incredibly familiar with myself. The feedback was very good, and I think I positively surprised a good deal of people on the first night. On the second night, it was, let's see if I can do it again.
And that brings us to Monday Night Raw, the Cruiserweight division. I know you can't go too in-depth on what's going to be going on with that very division, but what can we expect from Jack Gallagher in that division?
You can expect a bit of escapology, a bit of showmanship, and a lot of extraordinary.
I look forward to it. Let's get the generic stuff out of the way. Talk a little bit about how you got into professional wrestling, because that's always something I'm very intrigued to hear about. Everybody has a different story.
It is a very generic answer. I watched professional wrestling and somehow I stumbled my way into a training school, trained a lot, wrestled as much as I could, traveled around, learned from British legends as much as possible, went overseas, perfected my craft to the best of my ability, and didn't get a tan along the way, but, did my best.
Correct. Professional wrestling is a very interesting sport, a very interesting experience. So how would you compare it to, say watching a movie, say watching a television show? If, somebody's going to knock professional wrestling for being, using that F word. Talk a little bit about, comparing it to a movie or a TV show and how it compares to that.
Professional wrestling is a live performance in the same way that MMA unto itself and boxing unto itself is a live performance. Muhammad Ali said a lot of things to get people in their seats. Conor McGregor says a lot of things to make people watch him get beat up.
This is true.
This is a live performance. That is what we're doing. And all we're trying to do is put on a competitive, athletic display whilst also being showmen. If you have a problem with that, I'm not really too bothered.
Right. And you mentioned actually mixed martial arts. There's no secret you have a bit of a mixed martial arts background as well. How do you use that to your pro wrestling advantage?
Well, I like to believe I am a specialist in technical wrestling, particularly submission wrestling. That's my preference. And all that MMA did, all that Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and catch wrestling has done, is added to my repertoire of techniques. I know a couple techniques that I know people either don't know or aren't frequently used, which gives me an element of surprise, both for the fans and my opponents. It keeps me one step ahead in the little game of chess I'm playing.
Very interesting. I wanted to go through a few promotions with you and talk a little bit about your experiences with said promotions. I'm going to start off with one of the biggest promotions in the UK, and that being Insane Championship Wrestling, ICW.
Insane Championship Wrestling is aptly named. I stick out more like a sore thumb there than perhaps anywhere else, being in a three-piece suit, surrounded by maniacs who are all Scottish and all very drunk the majority of the time.
You got Future Shock Wrestling, which I know has pretty much been a staple throughout your career. So talk a little bit about them.
Yes, Future Shock is perhaps one of the best northern companies in the UK right now, and it's getting even better. It's the place that I made my debut for and has been extremely kind in both putting me in front of the fans as well as giving me the best opponents. So keep an eye on them.
I definitely recommend doing so. Grand Pro Wrestling, GPW.
GPW is also one of the places that I started out in. It's also somewhere up here in the northwest. It's in the home of old school Lancashire wrestling in Wigan, in the what was formerly called the Monaco Ballroom, now the Rose Club in Hindley in Wigan. It's had its ups and downs, it's had its fun, it's had its fair share of characters, and it's a little bit daft, but in the best way.
The Scottish Wrestling Alliance, SWA.
My little home away from home up north. I really enjoyed being with the SWA lot, particularly being around people such as Michael Whiplash, who I think is a phenomenal wrestler that everyone should see. Big Damo, which I think a lot of people are becoming much more aware of right now. And I enjoyed it so much up there, it actually convinced me, or almost convinced me, to move to Scotland a few years ago.
Title Championship Wrestling.
I've had very limited experience with Title Championship Wrestling, but it's been very fun so far. I didn't get to armbar Dan James. He's called the Armbar Superstar for those that don't know. I'll probably get round to that at some point.
Keep that in my mind. Great Bear Promotions.
The now defunct Great Bear Promotions. That was a fun little circus act that popped up here and there. You saw genuinely some of the best wrestlers in Britain in some of the strangest locations. It was absurdist, shall we say.
Pro Wrestling Chaos.
Pro Wrestling Chaos, I've only wrestled there once, but it was against the great Johnny Kidd on his retirement. So I'm indebted to them.
Just Do Wrestling.
Just Do Wrestling is a smaller promotion out of St. Helens. It's up and coming. I have jumped in and out of there. It's been less frequent as of late, but I have a good fun time there. It's a nice family feel.
Fight Club Pro.
Fight Club Pro, the clue is in the name, really. They like to pride themselves, as Progress Wrestling do, on British strong style. Trent Seven's probably the biggest name to come from there, and the atmosphere is unlike any other in British wrestling.
I definitely agree with that. New Generation Wrestling.
That is a company based out of Hull. It's been around for quite some time now. They've been trying to build up a good audience, trying to get British wrestling back on television. I was there at their first show, and every now and again I'll pop in when they want me back.
Pro Wrestling Noah.
I only wrestled one match for Pro Wrestling Noah. I didn't know you knew that.
I did my research.
Yes, Pro Wrestling Noah, a very interesting time. During my tour of 01, I wrestled there and one or two other handfuls of Japanese promotions. It's very strange stepping on the green canvas, if I'm frank.
Fair enough. Dragon Gate USA.
I wrestled for Dragon Gate UK.
I apologize.
No trouble. Once again, that was a one-time match during one of their UK tours. I had good fun. I actually didn't bump into Akira Tozawa. The world being as small as it is, it wasn't small enough that day. It was good for the exposure. It was good for the time that I was starting to come up in British wrestling and make a name for myself. I do wish that I'd continued with them, but que sera, sera.
And, of course, Preston City Wrestling.
I have wrestled there once. It was an okay match. I don't believe they have an interest in bringing me back. Oh, well.
Okay. That's a little strange, but leave it at that, I guess. Talk a little about the UK scene right now and talk about how it's blowing up. I mentioned all these promotions, and there's quite a few others that I haven't got the chance to mention. I mean, the UK has just taken the world by storm.
It really has. With Progress, with ICW, with places like Future Shock, which really focus on homegrown talent. They're really, really focused on building up their homegrown guys and making them considered just as good as the Americans. Because, to be frank, in this country a few years ago, if you weren't from overseas, you weren't considered a very good wrestler. Now, people like Progress, particularly Jim Smallman, the booker of Progress, one of the promoters of Progress, has always taken the opinion that it is built upon British talent, European talent as well, with Tommy End and Michael Dante, and they want them to be the attraction. And now, the American audiences, North American for Canada, are starting to realise that, to the point where the British guys are now starting to come over to America and make their own name. And more American guys, I have noticed, have started adopting a European style, which is quite frankly quite amusing to me now.
I've noticed that as well. The UK styles are really starting to branch out and become the main style, it seems, in professional wrestling nowadays.
It really has. It's something different. It is a different way of approaching, a different pace. But you're not going to replace British guys doing it. We're not here to copy Japanese wrestlers and American wrestlers. We are English through and through.
Very, very true. I wanted to talk a little about some of the names you've had in the past and how you landed on the Jack Gallagher name. Talk a little bit about that.
The Jack Gallagher name is my name. That's frankly it. I used to be called Jack Toxic when I first started because I was a 16-year-old lad who was into punk rock music, as every middle-class English person is at some point in their life. I have grown up a bit. I've read a few books. And the nickname Extraordinary Gentleman didn't come from professional wrestling. It was actually something that began at my gym, my MMA gym. Everyone referred to me as Gentleman Jack because I would turn up to an MMA gym in a three-piece suit. And it was just something I started incorporating.
Very, very interesting. I've noticed you've had a little bit of experience with somebody here that's, done a little bit of work. He's actually on one of these Smash versus Progress shows in Maybach Beta. Talk a little about working with Maybach Beta in the past.
Maybach Beta, he was another one who was in 01. He was a regular in 01 before it ever made my appearance. He's a very solid guy, has an incredible work rate, trains non-stop. I really think he actually might be a machine. And he's actually a surprisingly funny guy once you get past the initial aggression of being a huge mechanical heavyweight guy who's a little bit intimidating for a small little English man like myself.
I was going to say, you took the words right out of my mouth. Very, very intimidating. So glad to hear the experiences went well. Hopefully, maybe that's something that, you guys tied in together down the line.
Hopefully. It's always going to potentially happen, isn't it?
Very, very true. Jonathan Gresham is another name you've locked up with, one of our favorites here at the Weekly Wrestling Podcast. Talk a little bit about Jonathan Gresham.
I think Jonathan Gresham is perhaps one of the most underutilized talents in the world. He's a fantastic technical wrestler, and even though I said that Americans imitate European wrestling and you'll never quite get what the British guys do unless you're really British, Gresham integrated himself into England, learned from the British wrestlers. He is a fantastic technician, and I really, really think that he needs more exposure worldwide. He's phenomenal. I couldn't make up a bad thing to say about Jonathan.
I agree. Noam Dar is a guy that opposed you as well, or I shouldn't say opposed you, but was opposite of you, was inside the Cruiserweight Classic tournament as well. There's a few other UK names that I could bring up, but Noam Dar I want to bring up in particular. Talk a little about your experiences with him.
I think Noam Dar is someone who is so naturally talented, you forget how young he is, which is a real testament to him. He has so much room to grow. He has so much potential. He has so much more he can do. And I look forward to actually discovering him along with the world, because he is up in the cruiserweight division as well.
Correct. Yourself and Noam Dar representing the UK very much so in that cruiserweight division. That's going to be starting up in a couple weeks on Monday Night Raw. A couple more other questions before we end off the interview. I want to talk about your experience in the business as a whole. You've been wrestling for 10 years at this point, so talk a little about your longevity in professional wrestling, and talk a little about the way the business has changed throughout your run in the business.
I can speak mainly to my experiences in Britain. I did spend a year in Japan, and I've been around Europe, but the majority of my stay, of course, has been in Britain. I discussed this with a close friend of mine recently, and there's some positives and negatives to this, and that is, it feels as though the British scene has grown with this generation of wrestlers. When I first started, and I was absolutely awful, terrible, rubbish, you shouldn't have given me a second glance unless you wanted to say you're terrible twice, for the first 5 years of my career, and that's me being brutally honest with myself. And to be frank, the British scene wasn't amazing at the time. The production wasn't there, the crowds weren't coming in, the graphics weren't there, everything needed work. But over the 10 years that I've been involved in it, everything has come up. The talent is better. We've got some of the best athletes. We've got some of the best talkers. We have some of the best competitors in ring. Now we've got some of the best looking shows, some of the best sounding shows, some of the best produced shows. And as we've grown, it feels like the scene is expanding with us. And I think it's happening worldwide. Just looking at it as a whole business, it feels like slowly we're on the cusp of the mainstream again. And the only negative I can see to this is, if you're someone who's just getting into wrestling, you're going to have those first few years where you're not very good in front of a lot of people. I was very fortunate in the fact that I was very terrible in front of 20 people. If you debut now, you're going to be very terrible in front of a few hundred, maybe 1,000 people. It's positives and negatives, but as a scene, as a whole, as a business, as a art form, as everyone likes to refer to it now, as a show, it is perhaps better now than it has ever been. Whatever you like in professional wrestling, you can find it's tailored to your tastes if you're willing to look for it.
Yeah, there's no need for negativity in the business anymore. There's no need for bad things to be said about anything. If you don't like something, just move on. Just go on to something that you like. Go on to something that's going to bring you positivity, because at the end of the day, there's something for everyone. There shouldn't be any complaints.
Yes, very much so. Thank you very much.
I also wanted to bring up that brutal drop kick that you use as your finishing maneuver. How did you come up with using that as your finisher? Obviously, it's a drop kick, but talk a little bit about the force that you put behind it and how you came up with it.
I didn't really have a master plan. As much as I'd like to believe that I knew all along that that drop kick would finish people, I just found that I could kick people very hard in the head. And I found that people stayed down for a 3 count after I kicked them very hard in the head. It's really as simple as that.
Very, very simple. Very, very straightforward. Daniel Bryan goes on to say it on the Cruiserweight Classic, and I'm sure you've heard it from everybody, that it's one of the most devastating things he's ever seen.
I'd like to think it's beautiful, but beautiful devastation is something I'll settle for.
Going forward with the Cruiserweight division, if there's anything you want to put out there to your fans and supporters throughout your career, I mean, I wish you all the best with the Cruiserweight division, and I really appreciate the time that I've got the chance to talk to you. I mean, between Johnny Gargano, Tommaso Ciampa, Brian Kendrick, yourself, Noam Dar, TJP, Rich Swann, Cedric Alexander, Akira Tozawa, Grand Matza League, I think that Cruiserweight division is in very, very good hands.
If I was to say anything, I would say thank you very much to everyone, including yourself, for the continued support over the years and the new support of all the people who have just discovered me for the first time. I could do all the things I do in the ring now, but if no one cared about me, quite frankly, I wouldn't be going to the WWE. So thank you all, to all of the new fans, all the old fans. Keep supporting independent professional wrestling. Keep supporting WWE. Support professional wrestling. Find what you love. Be passionate about it. Engage with it. Just be expansive and immerse yourself in it.
With that said, I got to give you the chance to throw out any plugs that you'd like to, whether it be social media. I know we kind of covered the upcoming dates and what you have left on the schedule, but if there's anything else you want to get out there, including merchandising information as well, if you want to get that out to your fans, to the listeners.
You will find pretty much all the information you need on me on Twitter at GentlemanJackG. I'm on Instagram, Mr. Gentleman Jack. I have t-shirts on sale at Pro Wrestling Tees because everyone does. And I'm on Facebook, but I won't add you.
And that's it right there. Jack Gallagher, thank you so much for the time. Really looking forward to next weekend. Yourself, Evil Uno, yourself, Mike Rollins, and yourself versus Sebastian Suave. Again, thank you so much for the time.
Thank you very much for having me, sir.